how to heal the true mother wound and setting boundaries with toxic family members. This is unfortunately hitting home, and I'll be respectful and not divulge too much of my personal self, even though I've already threw a bomb in that relationship. But
Yeah.
yes, I think it's important to relate to everyone. But so thank you, Courtney, for being here. I'm so happy to be talking to you today.
I am so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a month.
I'm so appreciative of your time and your wisdom and talking about this mother wound. So, feel free to share if you would like your story and how open you are, and why the mother wound is such a passion topic for you.
Yes, absolutely. So I was raised by a man, a very patriarchal man, very sexist, the whole nine yards. And my mom and him had a very volatile relationship. Well, as a child, you don't quite understand that. You just realize that you're a part of these two people and they hate each other. And then my mom couldn't handle it. So she left. And the man that she left with was this Mormon. And my mom is, would switch religions with each marriage that she was in. Now she's been married and has started over and has a beautiful life. But at this time, she was very broken. And so she married this Mormon man, and he molested me at the age of 2. And my dad got full custody of me at 2 years old in the 80s, which was unheard of for a man to get custody of a child back then.
Yeah.
Because the courts would just throw it with the mom. So people were constantly asking growing up, like, why do you live with your dad? Where's your mom? Where's your mom? And as I grew up and got older, it was like I would see girls shopping, simple things like at the mall. And I would be there and I would just be just in awe watching these girls open shoe boxes for homecoming with their moms. And I'm like, I'm never going to have that. And so I started rebelling and really trying to push my dad away because, one, I was resentful as hell because he has his own sets of abuse and things. And really, he couldn't do it on his own. And after my grandmother passed away when I was 12, my whole world was rocked. I went from having some sort of stability and everything. And then we lived very lavishly on my grandmother's inheritance for a few years. And then it all went away. And I had nothing. And so in 8th grade, I decided, I did the whole I hate you, I want to live with my mom thing. And I went there and I got a real dose of reality. My mom had this new life and this new daughter, and I wasn't in it. And I have an older sister from another dad, a younger sister from another dad. And it was, she was living this happily ever after. And I always knew that I wasn't the priority, even at a very young age. I was always kind of the burden, always the nuisance. And so I really took on this role of playing the victim. And I fell into this because it was the only place I could fit in. And so I was defensive about everything. And I had these walls put up. And fast forward 20 years, I went through a huge dark night of the soul and tried to kill myself. I share my story very openly on my podcast and in my book Within. Mm-hmm. And during that time, my mom, who had an affair herself, who had done all the things that I was currently doing, instead of being there for me, was reaching out to my husband, telling my husband to divorce me and call CPS on me and take the kids away from me. And so I realized in that moment, I was like, you know what? Like, I'm done. I cannot keep doing this. I keep repeating cycles within my family and then playing the victim on like, oh, this is acceptable, instead of taking my power back. Yeah. And so I ended up telling her about 2.5 years ago, you're never going to talk to me again. And unfortunately, I had to cut that cord, and I haven't talked to her since. I don't know if I ever will talk to her again. I have forgiven her, and I have to love her from a place of distance because it is such a toxic relationship. And I'm not sure that when you're dealing, and it was funny because when I first got on my healing path, I was like, oh, I'm an empath and I'm this. And then as I went to school, I realized like, no, you're just in major trauma response, right?
Yeah.
And then I started seeing, because for me, we hear the word narcissist and it's thrown around like candy, right? Everyone's a narcissist. Yeah. But when you're really dealing with a narcissist, you typically think of a man, right? You don't think of a woman. And so I kept hearing this, and I started seeing all these things and hearing all these things. And I was like, oh my God, it makes sense. Like everything started to click for me. And I was like, I was responding to the behavior that I was being given as a child. And for so long, I carried all this blame of I'm not good enough. I'm not this. I keep messing up. I keep spiraling. I'm an alcoholic. I keep doing this. I keep doing that. And I'll never forget the day, seriously, the day that changed my life, as cheesy as that sounded. I sat with my own trauma therapist and I was like just sobbing. And I was just at a place of brokenness and not knowing what to do or how to do it. My kids were at those ages that at the time I didn't realize was my own molestation, was my own trauma when it started. And when they hit that age, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And I didn't even know what was going on until she looked me dead in the eyes and she was like, you're not broken. I'm not going to fix you. And she's like, you have literally been a victim of 2 narcissistic parents your entire life and being blamed for everything and then threatening to expose you when there's nothing to expose. And she goes, go fucking expose yourself. And I was like, whoa, 1, my therapist stopped the F-bomb. 2, I can do that. And 3, I'm safe, you know? And it was like this moment for me. And I was like, oh, and she's like, you're the victim. She's like, stop playing the victim. And she's like, at any time you can take your power back. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, yeah, I have been powerless. This is why I feel powerless. And I was like, I don't have to I never knew that I had any power until that moment. Because when you're dealing with real narcissistic abuse, you truly do feel like you're just under this thumb. You have no power. You have no control. You're just constantly reacting to everyone and everything. And it trickles in all areas of your life.
They control you with fear. Like you said, you thought, oh, I can't expose them. I can't expose myself. Bad things will happen. And that's just their lie of how they control you to keep you in their abuse grasp and not let everyone else know that they're not perfect and that they're abusing you. Yeah.
Yes. And it comes down to that fear-based thing. So as I went to school and as I studied more, I was like, oh, this motherhood wound affects my relationship with women in general. It affects my welcoming in sisterhood, me welcoming in new friends, me trusting people, me always having that guard up and never feeling able to be vulnerable. And so, you know, when I wrote within, it was like this powerful thing. And I was only going to write a chapter on it. And I ended up writing like 5 chapters relating to it because it just goes so deep.
It does. And I also want to ask you, so you had said that your mother was also wounded and, you know, going through her stuff. So I want to point out that it's not just like, oh, we're awakened to it now, so it must have just started. Like this is a multi-deep generational trauma. And, you know, I hate to say they did their best. Maybe they were, they weren't quite awakened, but to say the least, we can, you know, hold them accountable and have compassion for them at the same time. Do you agree? And can you talk on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like we hold so much generational trauma in general already, like epigenetics in the womb. We are growing this trauma that we don't even realize is happening. So all the things that her mother and I mean, a whole nother layer, time-lapse version, she's adopted. And what I found out later on, so her adopted mom is Croatian. I had an influencer job for an ancestry DNA thing. So I took it and she had always told me I'm half Italian and half French. So I was like, okay, I'm Italian. Like not a lick of Italian in me. I'm Croatian. And my mom's adopted mom went to Croatia for summers. And it was interesting because for some reason, me and my husband were driving to Tahoe and something reminded me of my grandfather, who I didn't call my grandfather, her dad. And we never really had a relationship with him. Like when I was younger and we would go visit my grandmother, he wasn't there ever until he got Alzheimer's and they were living together again. Like, I don't even remember them living together. And I don't know if they were broken up. Like I was never told any of that. But what I realized, she did tell me the one story about him was that she was at a party with his daughters, who were her sisters, who she has no contact with. And he had introduced his daughters, and then he had introduced my mom, Drina, his adopted daughter. And I was like, and my husband pointed out, he's like, how traumatic as a kid to like be pushed to the side like that. And then I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, she has 3 children and I'm the one that's always pushed to the side. They had 3 children. She was pushed to the side. I didn't fit her mold. I'm the different one. I'm the black sheep, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's interesting. And then when I got the ancestry DNA, I was like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. This goes back like generation upon generation with my ancestors. And like, I started really digging and healing that ancestral trauma. And like, it's amazing how much of that in our sacral we carry.
Yeah. So much. And
Mm-hmm.
it is passed through the womb. And it's also passed through like the subconscious mannerisms and speaking and how they talk about themselves. And we pick up on all that. And it makes me feel like I have such a huge responsibility to like heal all that. So my children have like zero of it. But I know that's not reality. But
I
it, it's just as long as that's the motivation, I think that I'll definitely be doing a better part and breaking the ancestral patterns there.
I know it was interesting the other 2 days ago. I was driving with my daughter, and she's always wanted to be a mom. And she has that just mother archetype, right? And she goes, I'm going to be a better mom than you. And I was like, oh, like right away. I'm just like, oh gosh. But here's what I realized was that, and I had to check myself, right? So I took a deep breath and I was like, okay, why did that just trigger you? And I
Yeah.
was like, how are you going to be a better mom than me? I want to hear. And she was like, I'm going to give my kids candy. I was like, and I was like, okay. And I was like, what else? And she was like, I'm going to let them have candy for breakfast. I'm going to let them be free. And she's like, and I was like, okay. And I was like, yeah, I mean, all we can do is continue each generation to be better mamas, right? That's how it works. And I was like, so you'll be a better mom than me, and your kids will be a better mom than you. And then we're going to get it right in like 4 generations down the way. And she kind of looked at me funny and she goes, I love you. You're a great mom. And she goes, you're always here. And I was like, just gonna ugly cry right now. But it's just those little things that we put so much pressure on ourselves when we have that motherhood wound to over exuberant, and we have to be so careful, because I've noticed a lot and I've seen a lot within myself and within my clients that a codependency can develop from us swinging too much on the other side of the pendulum, and we make our children responsible for our emotional needs that were never met by our parents, and that is a slippery slope.
Yeah, that then just creates another vicious cycle of now you're raising narcissists versus trying to fix the problem.
It's repeating here.
Wait, we don't want victims, but we don't want to create perpetrators either.
Yes.
Keep it balanced, people. Yeah. Loving boundaries from love. You still have to have boundaries. Yeah. Because, you feel so guilty, or you feel like you have to do the complete opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But you have to develop strong humans, and sometimes that is still uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean that you're being a mean mom. Like, may trigger within you because of your mother wound. But
yeah, and I have to ask myself too often, and I think this is huge if you do carry the motherhood wound, is that asking yourself before you make decisions. We don't really allow ourselves to pause, right? We're always like, oh, I got to respond, or you're thinking of your response while the other person's still talking, instead of truly like holding space and hearing them. And what changed my life was being able to ask myself after any relationship even with my husband, with my children, with anything I do, because I carry this wound and abandonment wound so deeply, I would ask myself, are you answering from love, or are you answering from fear? And when I first started doing this, 9 times out of 10, I was answering from fear, and I didn't even realize it, but I had to tap into that subconscious area. And the only way to do that is to pause, and we don't give ourselves that space.
yeah, because we probably didn't have it as a child.
Yes.
If we paused, then off they went, and we weren't ever heard, or the uncomfortable feelings just amplified.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really, really a difficult wound to heal. So how other ways did you start healing the mother wound?
The mother one for me was really big on somatics, which I did a ton of, actually, because I didn't realize how much of it I held in my body. And so somatics was huge for me, practicing. And there's so many resources online for somatics with the motherhood wound, in particular the fatherhood wound too. But really tapping into where in my body was I storing this, because so often we want to first go to the head and the thoughts. And really, when we're healing this deep of a trauma, it's physiological. And so to listen to our emotions and to listen to our body responses is such a practice within itself. And when I realized this and I was able to separate my thoughts from my emotions and be like, okay, this is triggering me. Where in my body am I triggered? Okay, I feel like I'm going to throw up. This is my solar plexus for sure. This is my confidence. This is all here. I need to really sit down. And it was like carving out time to do like solar plexus massage and like allowing myself to cry, which I mean, how often do we sit and be like, okay, I'm going to spend an hour crying? Like it's in my schedule, you know?
It's like that one reel or GIF audio was like, I'm just gonna go. She was like telling her kids, I'm just gonna go take like really good, like 15-30 minute, really hard cry, and then I'll be back. And then I'll, whatever it was. I was like,
Yeah, that's
when do
it.
we ever say that? Never. We don't ever say that.
I know. And that's what we
We need to
need.
hold space. We need to hold space for our inner child who has been wounded.
Yeah. And then it was really another one that was huge for my own healing journey and what I've seen for other people is getting comfortable with really being uncomfortable with that void. Cause that's what the motherhood wound is, right? It's a huge effing void that we have in our bodies. And it has to be filled somehow. Now we fill it with sex, we fill it with drugs, we fill it with alcohol, we fill it with all the wrong things, right? Shopping, whatever, it can be anything. We'd have to fill that void. And so I started, bike crash. I started really, I'm so tan talky. We started really analyzing, okay, this void is here. What can I fill this void with right now? Is it that I need to listen to a good podcast? Do I need to read a book? Do I need to sit and meditate just for 5 minutes? Do I need to take a bubble bath? But it was like these small acts of self-care to have that input, to fill that void with positive things. And sometimes, I mean, when I first started my journey, it was really, I would put it for me, yoga would save my life. And so I would lay out my yoga mat and I couldn't move because I wasn't strong enough yet. And I wasn't teaching at the time. I was just really frail in general, physically, mentally. And I would just lay on my mat and just like lay, and I would feel my body. I would feel my fingertips and more do like yoga nidra and like just tap into like feeling my body that I hadn't felt in so long. Because a lot of times you're like, yeah, I have a void. I don't know what it needs. Right. So we have to learn to listen first.
I love that. Every time I've done yoga, it has been the most massaging and healing and like soul tapping experience every single time.
Yeah.
That it does. Like that light fills the need for anything. I don't need a man afterwards. I don't need food afterwards. I don't need a mom or a dad or a sibling.
I'm good.
I'm good. Let's just stay here all day.
Yeah. And it was a way to like really love my body, you know, like, cause I hated my body. I hated everything about it. I was, you know, my parents used to make fun of me. They would say, you know, like simple things. Like I would walk into a room and they do a lot of humor, right? But it's mocking. Yeah. And when I was younger, it was just acceptable. So I'd walk into a room and they would call me like low nipples and, you know, all these things. And then I got a boob job later on down the world because I had low nipples, you know, like, so it was like all of these things that had been programmed into me to hate my body, to hate I had psoriasis. I had, you know, I was blind. I had my mom had to put butterflies on the slider. Like it was just all these things that I was constantly made fun of. Mm-hmm. When I really got deep into yoga, it taught me discipline because I had never had, I had either abusive discipline, which is very, very different, right? Control. And so then I went the other way of the pendulum again and went straight to rebelling, drinking, partying, going out all the time, having no rules, having no structure. I was like, when I raise kids, they're not going to have rules. They're going to be free. That doesn't work either. But, you know, that was my mindset when I was younger because I was so like, wasn't allowed to do anything. And I was like, if you would just let me go to the pizza parlor, I wouldn't do anything. We'll just go to the pizza parlor and come home. But like my dad would or mom would show up in a car, like outside of the pizza parlor. You know, it was just like, so much control that no one wanted to hang out with me. I had no friends. So my body, I was never safe. I was never liked. I was always rejected. And so that was one thing for me that yoga, it was so much more than just a workout. It was like discipline for the first time in my life and like truly having to learn my body's limits and what I liked and what I didn't like and learning what felt good in my own body. Yeah. And then sitting with it. Like you have to sit with stuff in yoga. And that was really uncomfortable for me at first.
It always comes back to that. This seems to be this running theme during Mercury retrograde. It's like revisiting like so many of my guests and even things that I've been coming up with. It's like, you just have to be you have to sit with the uncomfortableness. You have to sit in the mud in order for that transformation to happen. And it's
Yes.
okay, that mud
Yeah.
won't hurt
It's
you.
okay.
It will just
It will exfoliate your skin a little bit.
it will feel amazing, yes, unless you hate the slimy feel, but then you just embrace it and then you're like, wow. Then you clean off and it feels so good. That's the same thing. You clean off all that emotional mud that you have to sit in. Then you're like, oh my God, can I do more? Can I do more mud baths? Because this was amazing. Like, I got that out. I got this out. I got that out. I'm feeling better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I'd love it. Yeah. So, everyone, you just need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, and then you will embrace the uncomfortable.
Yes, and welcome it.
Yeah.
It's amazing now to me. I think this is so badass. I think it's so cool that now, and it's funny, we don't notice it till we're in it, right? I've had so many uncomfortable things happen that, especially with this retrograde with the 6 planets, it's kicking my ass. But this retrograde in specific, a lot of things have come up for me that I was like, I've dealt with that. And I'm like, ooh, that stings a little, that kind of hurts. And I really had to, like, example, driving with my daughter, I'm able now to sit back and be like, all right, what do I need to work on here? Because there's something, this person's pissing me off. It's clearly mirroring to me something that I have not done yet. I need to sit with it. And before, I would have never done that. I would have just been defensive, been reactive. And so it's magical to be like, oh, I like notice that this is like an ongoing journey the rest of my life now.
Yeah. It's one layer at a time. Yeah. No, and it's one layer at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that just popped like a really great analogy to me. Like, when you're getting defensive because your ego's kicking in, that's really what, like, when you're not holding space for yourself emotionally, it's kind of like a toddler throwing a tantrum emotionally. So us, needing to be healed before we start healing is kind of a very similar vibration as where the narcissists are at, those who are on the spectrum, not the sociopaths and the horrible malignant ones. But those who just are operating out of their own wounds and their own egos, and they're immediately defensive, so you looking at them like you are dealing right now with an emotional toddler. So no matter what age they are. So just bearing that in mind, this is what an expected reaction you're going to get. Yeah. So if you can sit with yourself, then you can sit with them. Again, if depending on where your communication levels are with this person, then, you can either completely be comfortable with not reacting to them or holding space for them.
Yeah. And I just got a huge download too. So when I was actively still, trying to do the dance with both my parents, it was interesting because my first, my oldest child, I actually had with a diagnosed sociopath. And yeah, he went to the Marines and he got diagnosed with PTSD, very sick man. He hasn't been in our life in a long time. He actually popped up this Mercury retrograde too. First time in 9 years. Yeah. Fun.
Wow.
So, I want to point out that if we don't do the inner work, we keep repeating the patterns with different people with the same behavior. So for me, it was my mom and dad, right? That was my starting point. And then it was like all these men that I would date were either, my child's father, diagnosed by a psychiatrist, a sociopath. And I want to point out too something, because people hear sociopath and they think like murder. It's actually just a lack of being able to feel any empathy for anyone or anything. So they're not incapable of feeling. So you could be sitting there with a sliced wrist bleeding to the ground crying, and they would be like, that's nice. They just can't. Yeah. So just point blank, because I know that word gets, a lot of the words get kind of mixed up a little bit, Not
all sociopaths are murderers, but a murderer can be a sociopath, right?
Yes. That. So it's interesting because if we don't do that inner work, we keep repeating these same patterns over and over again with different people, different places, different things, but we keep putting ourselves in that same emotional situation because that emotional situation of abandonment, of rejection, of all these things is safe to us because that is our safety as a child. So when we have feeling actually really safe, is a whole new dimension and uncomfortable and vulnerable. And you feel literally naked at first when you're around safe, healthy people. You're like, this isn't real. You're fake. I remember talking when I first started attracting these amazing women in my life. I was like, no way, no way. You are so fake. And it took me probably a year of like surrounding myself with these people that really pulled out these triggers and these abandonments. And I would notice I would like leave a coffee date and I'd feel the need to text them right afterwards because I said too much or I overshared or something happened that made me feel like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I need to apologize. And so I text and apologize. And these women, thank God, still with me today in my tribe, but would be like, why are you saying sorry for, I don't know. I felt really uncomfortable. Revert.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that's done that in the past. It's like, yeah, you like really enjoy it in the moment. And then because of your past wounds, you're like, oh shoot, like that's going to come back and bite me in the butt. I better like apologize right away. Yeah.
Yes. I said too much.
Yeah.
Thanks for living.
But it's like you have to risk being vulnerable with new people and really tap into your intuition to figure out, okay, are they healthy or not? And, you already are comfortable with the pattern of being stabbed in the back. So if it happens, okay, then that person's not to be had coffee with again.
Yes.
Moving forward. Oh, yeah, but it's like testing and experiencing life in new skin, in a new emotional skin, and testing the waters. And that's okay. That's just part of the experiment of life.
Yeah, and that takes time. I feel a lot of times we want to put like a time frame on it. And it's such an ongoing process when you have a wound that big. And when you really think back, this has gone on for thousands of years. So why do you think it's going to be fixed in 3 months? Especially when you're the one choosing to fit. It's just when we really step out of it, bird's eye view, and realize like, hey, okay, I can be a little more gentle with myself.
I 100% agree with you. The bird's eye view has helped in so many aspects.
I know we're already experts at dissociation, right? So I feel like we can really use this as a superpower if we learn how to channel it correctly.
Yes. Use it as the advantage, not like you're the victim, bird's eye view. The world is against you.
Yes.
That goes back to that powerful statement that your therapist had mentioned to you is like, rise up, like take back your power, which I think is part of healing this mother wound, is just being able to stop relying on someone outside of yourself to be your mother and remother your own self.
Yeah. And I would like to share, if that's okay with your audience, the top 3 exercises that seriously changed my life. Because one of the biggest things for me, and yes, a lot of people say what you resist persist, all the things that are very true. But when something is so unhealthy for your own personal journey, there does come a time that you're not cutting people off and being resentful at them. You're cutting people off to have your own space and heal. And so for me, a lot of people are like, oh, that's going to come back to you and they're going to cut you in another life. And I hear this crap all the time. And I just want to point out, if someone is unhealthy and unwilling to work on themselves or see their part in it, it is perfectly okay to cut the cord and release them with forgiveness and be done. Like you don't have to play the game. You can change the dance. And when they want to get help and when they want to come back, that's fine. That's great if you are in a space, but there comes a time that you have to put yourself first. And so 3 exercises, because yes, we can talk about forgiveness. We can talk about taking your power back, but what does that mean? Like, how do we do that? Okay. It's like, that sounds great, but for someone sitting there that's in, currently under the thumb, it feels impossible. So 3 things that like changed my life with this is whoever the person is, whoever that you're struggling with the relationship with, whether it's a partner or a mother or a father, sibling, whoever it is. you write them a letter, and you start off with a fuck you letter. So you are like getting your emotions out, and you don't feel bad about it either. It's like, fuck you for never being the fuck you for, like angry, right? Like you're ripping the paper, you're pissed off, you're getting it out. And after that, you burn it, you release it. And then you write a real letter, like you would write to them. Dear mom, I'm so hurt that you did this to me, and da 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 da. I'm mad that you let your husband molest me into. I'm mad that I found out in my 30s about it. I'm mad that da 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 da. I'm mad that you lied my whole life. I'm mad, and you go through and you write this letter. And then after the letter, and I walk through this in my book too, for details. And I think the first 30 pages is free on Kindle. So the exercise should be there, like a letter example. Mm-hmm. And then the next one is you write a response letter from your parent. And this is where it gets tricky. So you write the letter, and then you respond as your parent, your sibling, your boyfriend, whoever it is, would respond to you. And when you respond to that letter, you have to dig deep. And it's like this level of compassion that you don't know is there. And you're like, oh gosh, I feel attacked by this letter. I'm, I would never do this. And you got to really like kind of embody the other person, which puts us in their shoes, right?
Yeah.
And the things that come up when we're able to, and by this third letter, you should be able to be flowing through your subconscious mind if you're writing them back to back to back. So by this third letter, you can go back and you start to look at the age that your abuse started. What was the person who was the abuser? What was their life like? So for me, my mom had been through 3 marriages. She had cheated. She had been cheated on. She had been chased with a knife at her work. Someone had stolen her purse. Like all these traumatic events had happened back to back to back. She got pregnant at 19. She was adopted. She had this huge gaping father wound. And when I started really analyzing her life on things that I had never looked at, a part of me for inkling of a second was like, oh shit, that's heavy. Like that's heavy. And then to bring 3 kids in the world, I would only be able to do 1 too. That's a lot. Single mom, working 3 jobs, like that's a lot.
Yeah.
And for a minute, it gave me the space to be like, I get it. Like my dad was abusive to you. You couldn't take it. You hated him. I can relate to that. I hate my oldest father. There we go. We empathized right there, right? Like we connected on something, although she has no idea we're connecting. And so, but I could make that cord connection. And I was like, okay, I can feel that. I can feel that I couldn't be around that. And you had no choice because he had full custody of me. So the only way that you could possibly live with a child as a basic mom, like you automatically have that love for a child. Even if you're a narcissist, there's still a layer of love. It just comes off as very different. Yeah. But I was able to see why she had to cut that off with me emotionally as a mother-daughter connection, because it would have killed her otherwise. Yeah. And so when I was able to understand that, I was like, oh, and then I got older and it was like I guess I was 15. A 15-year-old was born into your lap. Well, I had the mother wound very clearly. I'd been raised by my dad. I was exactly like my dad. I triggered the shit out of my mom because I was exactly like him, right? Yeah. And so all of these things and these mannerisms started coming to me, and I came to this space of like compassion and understanding, not enabling the behavior or saying it's right, but I was able to tap into this space of, okay, you're still fucked up for what you did, but I get it. I understand it. I am able to forgive you because I understand it. The fact that you're still like this, I can't have you in my life. I can't have you in my children's life, but I get it. And I release you with love, like full love. And like, I want you to live a good life. I want you to live your happily ever after because you never got that. And so for me, it was just this space of release and freedom with those 3 letters. And it's such a simplistic practice, but when you're in it, I'm telling you what, it can take hours upon hours. And when you're done, you need a nap. Like you are exhausted, you're done, because your brain goes places that you didn't even know you could go.
That sounds so powerful and extremely healing. And that's where it all can come from in a healthy way, is from love.
Yeah.
Any type of no contact, it only works and is healthy for both parties and healing if it's coming from love versus hate.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing those. That's really very powerful.
Yes, I hope it helps one person out there listening.
Yes, I know it's going to help a whole bunch of us out here listening. Courtney, this has been amazing. I really appreciate you and all your wisdom that you shared today and those exercises and for sharing your story so vulnerably. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I love talking to you every time.
I can't wait to connect with you further. And how can all of our listeners connect with you?
Yes, so I am on the Sweetest Little Life. It's my Instagram, website, Facebook, all the things under the Sweetest Little Life. And then my book Within, which has all of these healing modalities and much, much more, is wherever books are sold.
Perfect. All right. All the links to all of those will be in the show notes as well, you guys. Make it nice and easy. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. And remember, everyone, keep your unique light shining.